Good morning, everyone. We are glad you can join us for today's International Business Council program on U.S. South Korea business relationship. We have a great panel here, as we always do, and appreciate the opportunity to have you plug into this conversation. I'm Ralph Schultz. I'm the CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, and welcoming you today. For over 25 years, growing international business connections has been a pillar of the Chamber's economic development work. Being a part of the global economy is very important to the success and prosperity for our region here in Tennessee. Some days that means working alongside global businesses to help them grow and expand in the Nashville region. But today that means hosting events like this morning's program, which brings the brightest minds in foreign policy and diplomatic circles to the Nashville region. And I know that we've enjoyed all of these episodes over time. Minister Kim, Deputy Assistant Secretary Knapper, and Mr. Stangarone, I'm happy to virtually welcome you to Nashville. We also issue a standing invitation to come visit us in person, because the experience of Nashville is what brings you the full knowledge of the vitality of this economy. So we welcome you guys this morning. This program is part of the Future of Korea project in conjunction with the World Affairs Councils of America and the Korea Economic Institute of America. This event would not be possible without the partnership we have with the Tennessee World Affairs Council. The TENWAC is an independent, nonprofit, educational grassroots organization that works to inform our community about the world. I encourage you to become a member and check out their slate of virtual programs on the TENWAC website. Also, a huge thanks to our other partners, the Center for International Business at Belmont University and the IBC's presenting sponsor, Baker Donelson. Without your support and the support of all of these organizations, programs like this would not be possible. Now, with that, I'm going to turn the program over to our ever effervescent and knowledgeable moderator, John Scannapieco. John?
Thanks, Ralph. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Scannapieco, and I chair Baker Donelson's global business team. And I want to welcome everybody this morning to our excellent presentation. We've got three really great speakers today who have unique insight into the economic and diplomatic relationships between South Korea and the United States. And one of our speakers even has a Tennessee connection, as you can see from the background. But before we hear from our speakers, I'd like to take a minute to recognize the Chamber sponsors that make today's event and other events possible. Baker Donelson is the IBC's presenting sponsor, and we always appreciate the opportunity to partner with the Chamber on these international activities and events. The Chamber's pivotal partners, Delic U.S. Holdings, Bass, Berry & Sims, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, Community Health Systems, Gresham Smith, and Regions. And also the Chamber's supporting sponsors, Bank of America, the Center for International Business at Belmont, Nashville International Airport, Mitsui USA, and United Healthcare Global. And finally, our media partner, the Nashville Post. So I want to thank all of the sponsors who make these programs possible. So let's kind of move on to our program. Tennessee and the Republic of Korea have strong business, political, and cultural connections. There are over 17 Korean-owned businesses in the state of Tennessee that have invested nearly $1 billion and employ nearly 4,000 Tennesseans. Many of you know much of that investment is clustered just north of us up in Clarksville, where you find Hankook Tire, LG, and Atlas BX operating daily, and hopefully more to come in the future. And you also may remember back in October of 2019, I know that seems like it's a decade ago when we could actually meet in person, but we hosted U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, Harry Harris. And Ambassador Harris actually was born and raised in Crossville, Tennessee. So today we welcome home, although virtually, another Tennessean who is integral to the U.S.-Korea relationship, Troy Stangarone with the Korea Economic Institute of America. Welcome, Troy, and welcome virtually home to Tennessee. We obviously appreciate your background of Memphis. Joining us from the U.S. State Department is Marc Knapper, who serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan. Marc, thanks for joining us during what I'm sure is an extremely busy time in D.C. at the moment. So we really appreciate your time today. And last but certainly not least, we welcome Minister YoungJae Kim, who is the Economic Minister of the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the United States. So today's program, we're going to start with remarks from Troy, followed by Marc, and then we'll end with Minister Kim. But now during the presentations, please enter your questions into the chat box, or really preferably in the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen, and then we will get to those at the conclusion of Minister Kim's comments. So Troy, why don't you kick us off, and thanks again for joining us today.
Well, John, thanks. It's really great to be here. It's always good to come back to Tennessee, even if it's only virtually. So I've been really looking forward to this event. And, I think I want to start off and just sort of lay out a few basic things. You talked about the ties between Tennessee and Korea. Clearly, there's been a lot of investment. A lot of this has been helped to be facilitated by the U.S.-Korea FTA, which created some stability in our economic relationship by formalizing a lot of the rules of trade between our two countries. But, if we look at, Tennessee specifically sort of, on a whole, we're actually seeing a decline over the last, couple of years in trade. In 2017, there was about $833 million worth of goods exported from Tennessee to South Korea. In 2019, we don't have the full 2020 state data yet. It was only 725 million. So, we've seen some decline. I guess, part of the question is going to be kind of, how much of this is happening? Clearly that's pre-COVID. I would expect the 2020 numbers to, be down obviously as well. But there does seem to be a trend over the last few years of, after having seen some growth, to see some decline. If we though look at more broadly, the relationship between the sort of, the 5th district of Tennessee, the Nashville area, and South Korea, if I can, our website, www.kia.org. If you're watching either in Nashville or somewhere else in Tennessee today, we have trade data on our website for exports from all states in the U.S. and all the congressional districts, and you can find that on our website. But if you look at that, actually, in the 5th district, services are the most prominent export from Nashville to South Korea. On the manufacturing side, it's been roughly, even over the last 5 or so years, looking at the data. And you're talking about things like communications equipment, motor vehicle parts, non-ferrous metals. These types of things tend to be the most exported items. But, sort of like looking ahead, we've had a transition here in the United States to the Biden administration now. Under the Trump administration, we updated the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. So that's taken and helped sort of expand some of the opportunities, specifically on the auto sector side, by raising some of the quotas that were in place for U.S. exports to South Korea, which I think, right now maybe are hard to sort of envision how those would work out. But I'll give you an example. When the agreement was put in place, in terms of vehicles you could send over that met U.S. safety standards, it was 25,000 per producer. Toyota, who actually exports a lot of vehicles to South Korea from the United States, was running up close to that threshold. So Toyota will probably be the first U.S. automaker to benefit from this change, which is now up to 50,000. But, all U.S. automakers will eventually benefit from that and have the ability to take and export to South Korea without having to worry about issues in terms of certain safety standards. So at least until you get to a volume to where you can address those standards. But looking ahead, I think, one, we all know President Biden has, one, emphasized, trying to restore manufacturing in the United States, and two, trade isn't necessarily on top of the agenda. So I think early on we'll see stability, but I do think probably later this year when President Biden goes to Asia for the first time for things like the APEC meetings, we'll start to see some pressure building for a more proactive trade agenda. But looking specifically at Tennessee and maybe the 5th District, there are a few areas that I think if you look at sort of South Korea, that makes sense either in terms of maybe exports to South Korea or areas to partner. And I'm going to talk about different parts of the state as well. One, South Korea is doing a significant push in terms of moving towards renewable energy. They have what they call a Green New Deal. Part of this actually predates the Green New Deal into what's called the hydrogen roadmap. There's a lot of emphasis on developing hydrogen as a fuel source, specifically for automotive vehicles. Clearly, with Tennessee's background, perhaps over time, there are areas for either part suppliers in the US to manufacturers for Hyundai and Kia here in the US to get into that area. You also have a significant push for electric vehicles in South Korea. And we all know that the Nissan Leaf is built at the plant in Smyrna. So, potentially, you have opportunities here in terms of exports on the auto side, or maybe investment in the future into Tennessee to support Korean auto manufacturers in the United States. Two, if we look at South Korea's population, it's aging very rapidly. It's going to be one of the oldest populations in the next decade or two. Tennessee obviously has a strong healthcare industry. So, when we're looking at the healthcare sector, be it either perhaps the export of medical parts, which for the state as a whole is actually one of the larger, exports. You could be looking at things in the healthcare industry that might be beneficial in terms of meeting the needs in South Korea. I grew up in Chattanooga. As we all know, Chattanooga has one of the fastest internet sectors or systems in the world through EPB. You also in that have growing tech sectors in Nashville. Chattanooga is well set for the tech sector. South Korea is a very high-tech society, so there's a potential for trying to attract South Korean tech companies there, and talking about the infrastructure in Tennessee that would be there for accessing the U.S. market or just doing other types of high-tech, things in the state. Lastly, one of the things that I want to sort of focus on is, on the services side, the largest export is travel. So, tourists coming into the state. And, having grown up in East Tennessee, I can tell you, it's a very beautiful region, one of the most beautiful regions I've been to. And, South Koreans really enjoy things like hiking. And I think, promoting, East Tennessee as a destination, be it the Smoky Mountains or, anybody who's had a chance to hike up Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga and then view the river bend through downtown. It's a gorgeous site, famous Civil War battle site, the Battle Above the Clouds. I think these are all kinds of things that could be marketed to potential tourists in South Korea. And, the thing about this is that, like anything, when you leave the United States, like we all know these types of things, but when you're in another country, you see things about New York, you see things about LA, maybe Chicago, a few other places. And so I think, despite the natural beauty of Tennessee, and, even like the Nashville area in terms of like music tourism, so in terms of, coming to see, the different, the Grand Ole Opry, other things, I went to even the Lantern Festival just before, or not this past year, but, the year before. It's a gorgeous, great thing. There's a lot of these opportunities to try and I think attract Korean tourists to Tennessee and something to look at. And so I think with that, I'd like to kind of like conclude sort of my initial remarks, but I am happy to take and, talk about any of these other issues and other things, as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Those excellent comments. I really appreciate it, especially with around the, I hadn't really thought about the electric vehicle opportunities for the state. And I know, Tennessee, that is a priority of the economic development initiatives for the state, is to attract kind of inbound, more investment around the electric vehicle, around the electric vehicle battery. So there may be some good opportunities. So I really appreciate that, those comments. Marc, how about we turn to you?
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thank you especially to the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce and KEI America for including me today. It's an honor to be here. I'm not from Tennessee, but I've had the pleasure of visiting several times, and I can attest to what Troy said about the beauty of the Great Smoky Mountains, as well as the great cultural vibrancy there in Nashville. Been to the Grand Ole Opry. Really enjoyed it, and sincerely hope we get back to a time when we can again travel more freely and gather in great cultural icons like what you have in Nashville. Troy gave us an excellent overview of sort of the economic and trade relationships. So I'll begin my brief remarks a little more on the security and diplomatic relationship we have with the Republic of Korea. As many or all of you are aware, our relationship with South Korea began on the battlefield, really, in 1950 with the outbreak of the Korean War. And in 1953, we cemented an alliance with the ROK, the Republic of Korea, that lasts to this day. We had 37,000 American soldiers perish in the war, nearly 1,000 Tennessean casualties. And I understand there are 134,000 Korean War veterans who resided over the years in Tennessee. And so certainly deep ties between Tennessee and the ROK in terms of South Korea's fight for its independence and its freedom. But this relationship with South Korea began as an alliance on the battlefield, and today we've got 28,500 U.S. troops in South Korea, along with their families. We call it an alliance forged in blood, and truly the U.S. commitment to this alliance remains as strong as ever. The Biden administration remains fully committed to not just maintaining but strengthening our security relationship with South Korea, and we've benefited tremendously from the peace and stability that this alliance has brought to the region over the years. And our U.S. troops there remain prepared, as they say, prepared to fight tonight, to deter and if necessary, defend against North Korea. But this relationship with South Korea isn't just about security anymore. Although it began as a military-focused relationship, it's evolved over the decades into something that's much more. And this is something about which we're very proud, that the U.S.-South Korea relationship now encompasses virtually every aspect of human endeavor that you can think of, from trade and investment to science and technology cooperation to health cooperation, people-to-people ties. As we heard from Troy, there's very, very deep roots between Tennessee and South Korea in terms of trade and investment. South Korea is America's 7th largest trading partner. It's a major investor now in the United States, particularly throughout the South, and in Tennessee, about $1 billion worth of investment, as we heard from Mr. Scanapieko, 4,000 good paying jobs for Tennesseans, thanks to Korean investment companies like LG Electronics, Hankook Tire. And so, this is an aspect of our two countries' ties about which we're very proud: the trade, the investment, the good jobs created, because this is something the Biden administration is really all about. It's ensuring that the trade with our foreign partners ensures that working families are protected, that we defend our values, that we protect America's long-term prosperity and security, and we're ensuring that American workers remain competitive throughout the world. And so this is the focus of the Biden administration's approach to trade. And so, but beyond trade, beyond investment, we're very proud as well of, as I mentioned, our science and technology and our health cooperation. And these are areas, Troy got into it a little bit in terms of some of the high-tech fields that Korea excels in, and I think definitely present opportunities for our two countries going forward. Right now in South Korea, there's a lot of talk of what they call the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is focused on technology like the Internet of Things, nanotechnology, biotechnology, AI, autonomous vehicles, hydrogen-powered vehicles, hydrogen-powered power plants, and so on. And so these kind of areas, Korea is very focused on. Korea is working to excel in, and I think there are opportunities abound there in Tennessee as well for our researchers, our scientists, our engineers to collaborate with their South Korean counterparts for the benefit and the prosperity of both of our peoples. I would also note, I think, just in terms of demographic challenges, this is something that's another area potentially for cooperation between our two countries. Korea, as many of you know, is dealing with the effects of aging society and declining birth rates. And so demographic challenges, sort of taking care, medical care and other care for the elderly is a huge issue there that Korea is tackling. And so I think, collaboration with partners in Tennessee on addressing demographic challenges is another potential area, given, as Troy mentioned, the strong sort of healthcare industry there in Tennessee. I would note people-to-people ties are a major focus of, when we talk about our relationship with South Korea. We benefit from 2 million Korean Americans in the US. There are about 200,000 Americans living in South Korea. We've got close to 50,000 Korean students in the United States, including several hundred Korean students in Tennessee. Figure I saw earlier was that Korean students in Tennessee generate about $11 million for the economy a year. And so it's a big deal to be able to have and welcome foreign students, Korean students, whether it's a University of Tennessee or Belmont University or across the state. But more than the economic benefits of foreign students and foreign exchanges, I think it's the societal and the sort of diplomatic benefits we gain. All these students, all these young people going back and forth, they build bridges for our two countries to further strengthen our ties. Because without these kind of people-to-people relations, virtually, nothing positive can happen in our two countries' alliance. And so, if I could have one wish, I would triple the number of young people in both countries right now, because I think it really is the key to our two countries' relationships future. I'm a beneficiary of a student program as a young person, and so to those of you out there who run cultural exchanges, who run youth exchanges, who are in charge of educational exchanges, I commend you, urge you to keep working at it, because it's organizations like the World Affairs Council, like the Chamber of Commerce, sort of societies that promote international exchanges that help to sort of pave the way to the future of the U.S. ROK alliance. So with that, I will stop, and certainly happy to answer any questions that folks might have. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Mark. And I could not agree with you more regarding the people-to-people exchanges. I think too many times I see, especially on the American side, we reject what we don't know or what we don't understand. And I think a lot of that is simply because of that, and not because it's good or bad. We just don't understand it. We don't know it. And I think through those exchanges, we really get a chance to really learn more about just the wonderful differences actually that exist out there about different cultures and different people. And so I'm such a big proponent of of those exchanges. In fact, I think all of my kids have already told me they're going somewhere at some point in different parts of the world, so they can really experience that. And I try to encourage that. So thank you for that. I think that's a great. That's a fantastic comment. If we take one thing away, I think that's a good one. Minister Kim, why don't we turn to you? Welcome today.
Thank you, John. Good morning, Tennessee. Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to meet you all in the business circle in Tennessee. I would like to extend my appreciation to Tennessee World Affairs Council and Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce for organizing this event. Well, previous two speakers made an excellent presentation, the overview of our bilateral economic relations. This morning, given limited time, I'd like to focus rather specific commercial aspect of our bilateral relationship, because we have another session in the evening where I can address more general aspect of it. One quick note, though, is that Korea is 10th largest economy in the world and 6th largest trading partner of the United States. We are a big force, a bigger force than ordinary people think in the international economy. Having said that, Korea and the United States, as mentioned, have a free trade agreement in place. And this agreement has been in effect for about 9 years now. The benefit of this FTA was concentrated in the early stage of the implementation, where the immediate elimination of tariffs occurred to many products. But there are some sensitive products that have longer period of tariff reduction, mostly agriculture or livestock products. In that case, American exports have advantageous position in the Korean market in the competition with other exporting countries that have the similar FTAs with Korea. It is because the Korea-US FTA started the tariff reduction earlier than other FTAs that came late. So for example, the most favored nation tariff rate of beef is 40% in Korea. So it is gradually being reduced over 15 years, starting from the entry into force of each FTAs. So as of the year 2021, the tariff rate for the US beef is 13.3%. For Australia, it's 18.6%. For Canada, 21.3%. Many other countries without FTAs face 40% tariff rate. So the US will be the first country that gets zero tariff rate in beef exports to Korea in 2026. On auto, the market share of the American cars, unfortunately, has not increased in Korea as fast as we first expected when we entered into force the FTA. On average, American cars take about 15% of the share in the imported car market in Korea, because European cars have strong presence in Korea as well as in Japan, in other Asian markets. But despite the pandemic last year, the American car sales in Korea increased to 20% of the share, which is a good sign to the American auto industry. I took these two examples of beef and auto, among other products, to say that businesses can greatly benefit from engaging with your congressmen in Washington, D.C., both in the Senate and in the House. In trade with Korea specifically, for example, the former senator from Montana and the former member of the House from Michigan, they greatly contributed to resolving trade issues with Korea for the American beef exports and auto exports, respectively. So it is very important for your business to engage with your government and the other government if you have issues with conditions in the exporting market. That way, both governments can have the chance to manage the overall trade relationship very healthy. Next, on energy. Although Tennessee is not specialized in energy sector, Korea is expanding imports of US LNG in line with our clean energy policy. Our main import lines of LNG were Qatar and Russia, but to diversify the import sources for the energy security purpose, we are increasing the portion from the United States. In services, there are many financial companies and IT companies doing business with Korea in Korea, and they consult with both governments to enhance the regulatory environment in Korea. For example, about financial prudence regulations and consumer data privacy rules in Korea. As you may know, there are a number of international agreements as well as ongoing negotiations to harmonize the rules on digital or e-commerce area. The Biden administration is committed to actively engaging in such international coordination efforts, and the Korean government very much welcomes that. On construction services and infrastructure, Korea and the United States have common interest in developing infrastructure in such regions as Southeast Asia, including smart city projects and 5G networks. If our two governments coordinate successfully in their foreign policy, there will be many good business opportunities in other regions than Korea and the United States. So that leads to my conclusion, that is, the joint efforts of the private and the public will greatly expand the horizon of the businesses for the benefit of our both countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Kim. It's really, I think, helpful for us. I think so many times we view the world through our American lenses and we forget that there is obviously other perspectives. And so it's always nice to hear from the perspective of, say, in this case, our focus country, which is South Korea. So we really appreciate and welcome your comments, and especially describing some of these opportunities and ways that we can engage. So thank you again for that. So again, please, everyone, if you have some questions, put them in the question and answer box, and we will get to those questions in just a second. But what I'd like to do is kind of throw out a question for all three of our panelists, because again, they approach it from three very different perspectives. And everyone kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's really just hone in on it. We now have a new administration. The Biden administration has been in office for about a week. And, what are your expectations, from this administration with respect to U.S.-South Korean relations? Minister Kim, why don't we start with you, and then Mark, we can go to you, and then Troy, we'll finish with you.
Well, I'll focus again the economic relationship between the Korean government and the new Biden administration. Last year, all of us experienced the steepest economic downturn since World War II. As the world market continues efforts to move out from this pandemic, there's no doubt that Korea will enhance its economic relations with new administration based on our solid alliance. I have the latest World Economic Outlook by IMF. It actually increased the prospects of U.S. economy's growth rate 2%, 2%. That is from 3% growth this year to 5% growth this year. That is enormous change from the estimate in last October. So again, we expect that the United States, as the largest economy in the world, will take a lead in global efforts to achieve, economic recovery. And Korea stands ready to coordinate closely with the United States. Particularly, I would like to mention the area of climate change. For instance, President Biden aims to achieve a net emission zero economy by 2050. That is the same goal that Korean president announced 2 months ago. So I'm sure we will be able to cooperate in ways that will help this dream, make this dream a reality. The Korean government is focused on our vision of what we call Green New Deal, as mentioned, Troy, in which in this policy, our focus will be placed on accelerating the transition of our economy towards a low carbon and eco-friendly economy. We intend to invest more than $60 billion to create hundreds of thousands of jobs aimed at strengthening climate actions, realizing a green economy, and investing in green infrastructure, renewable energy. And with all this, we look forward to closely working with new administration to the new administration is committed to similar goals with Korea. So we look forward to working with new administration as closely as possible in the future.
Thank you, Minister Kim. We appreciate it. Mark?
Sure. Well, thank you. So the Biden administration, we consider the Indo-Pacific region as absolutely vital to the current and future prosperity of the United States, to the security of the United States. And so I think you can expect to see, under the Biden administration, the United States taking great steps, making great efforts to restore itself as a Indo-Pacific power, and taking steps to ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open, secure and prosperous. And so, we believe that the really key to all this is strengthening our alliances and working in lockstep with allies and partners in the region with whom we share values, with whom we share interests. Of course, the Republic of Korea is top among these allies. I mean, these alliances, this alliance relationship we have with South Korea, we consider it to be, you know, our greatest strategic asset. And so if the United States is to remain strong and influential in the Indo-Pacific region, we really have to ensure that our alliances are the pathway to maintaining our position here. So the Biden administration, you know, we're going to work very hard to strengthen these alliances and also work to deepen partnerships with others like India, like Vietnam, like New Zealand. And so as we're modernizing, as we're strengthening our alliances, you know, particularly with South Korea, we're going to look for ways we can deepen our cooperation in areas, as we discussed earlier, areas like new technology, cutting edge technology, looking at ways we can deepen our cooperation with South Korea in terms of promoting democracy, promoting democratic resilience, and also, as we heard from Minister Kim, things like climate change, of course, working together on responding to the ongoing COVID pandemic, but also how do we predict and how do we forecast and deal with future pandemics? Because I mean, I think we all realize that this could very well happen again. And so you know, Korea enjoys a very special position for having sort of done a terrific job dealing with the pandemic. And so I think we have a lot to learn from the South Korean example, and certainly we'll want to work closely with South Korea going forward on addressing infectious diseases, pandemics, but also, you know, forecasting them and hopefully helping to prevent the dramatic spread that unfortunately we saw over the past year. Thank you.
Thanks. Troy?
So first of all, I'd just like to echo everything that Minister Kim and Deputy Assistant Secretary Knapper just said. You know, all of those are point on. The one or a couple of things I think I'd like to add is that one, I think, you know, going forward, there will also be looks at how, not just on a bilateral level, we can cooperate with South Korea on some of these issues, be they either the pandemic or on things like renewable energy and alternative energy sources, but also how we can cooperate either in plurilateral groups or multilaterally as well. So to give a specific example, you know, I've talked some about hydrogen. Japan is also pursuing hydrogen as an alternative fuel source. Australia is really looking into exporting hydrogen produced off renewable energy, so that way as not to add additional carbon into the atmosphere. So the question sort of becomes, you know, how can we all as allies sort of work together, at least as U.S. allies, not necessarily allies with each other, you know, to try and take and really work together, not to just on the technology, but to build the ecosystem that's needed to take and really bring these types of fuels that are still somewhat nascent, you know, into the market at competitive price levels and everything, because, you know, hydrogen is moving that way, but it's one thing that, you know, you still need more scale before you really get to, you know, the competitive nature you need for it to be. So I think, you know, we'll see the Biden administration not just look to cooperate on a bilateral level with, you know, our allies, be they South Korea or others, but on these types of issues, either on a plurilateral level with this group of countries, or, you know, at places, you know, on the international level, be they either at the WTO or other areas, to try and build coalitions to ensure that we have the right types of trade rules that we need to ensure fair competition around the world.
Great, thank you, Troy. And you know, Marc, you actually, when you mentioned South Korea as a great example of how they dealt with COVID-19, it actually dovetails with the question we actually received from one of our attendees. And Minister Kim, I'd like to maybe direct this question to you. South Korea has handled the COVID-19 pandemic incredibly well, with lower infection and death rates and a fairly quick economic rebound. What lessons can the U.S. learn, do you think, from how South Korea has handled the pandemic? If you were going to maybe provide us with some advice, maybe what would that advice be?
Well, that one quick answer, one line answer is that we did not impose large-scale social distancing regulations. Instead, we utilized a strategy of extensive testing, tracing, and treatment. And so we have used targeted quarantine measure. But I don't think we are not in a position to give you advice because each country has its own system. I think in the case of a health crisis, Korean system was more adaptive to cope with this kind of system because we already had a similar crisis 5 years ago when we had a MERS outbreak in Korea. That was the whole nation actually received vaccination five years ago, and then we established the health system based on the experience from 5 years ago. The United States system is totally different. You are more adaptive to more in encouraging innovations, and then the free market. But you have more liberal system, market administration everywhere. It will be a little slow when you were first encountered this kind of problem. But as I said, the United States will start to pick up and how to learn to fight this kind of crisis, and then eventually, I believe the U.S. will come out of this crisis very quickly, the first in the world, I guess.
Well, Minister Kim, thank you. That was a very diplomatic answer, and I appreciate that. Mark, I saw your hands. Yeah, why don't you chime in? That'd be great.
Yes, thanks, John, and thanks, Minister Kim. And just one really unique example of the kind of cooperation that we enjoyed with South Korea last year was, last April, South Korea successfully held a general election in the midst of this pandemic, and I think had very high turnout rate for its voters. And so, of course, with our own election coming up, the State Department organized an event, one of these web events, between Korean national election officials and various secretaries of state from the 50 states, the officials who run elections in each state, and got them together virtually to talk about best practices in holding safely, holding an election in the middle of a pandemic. And so we had these various secretaries of state, including, I'm sure, from Tennessee, ask questions about, how far apart should people stand when they're waiting in line to vote, and how much disinfectant do you need to prepare for election day or the days ahead of the election? I mean, very sort of detailed, precise, kind of concrete ways of safely holding an election. And so I think we benefited tremendously from the example Korea set, and the great best practices that Korean election officials shared with our own election officials. So for that, I like to tell that story because it really is a pretty special example, and of course we're very grateful for it.
Oh, that is. I mean, that's something that, of course, we as just normal citizens I knew nothing about that, but maybe we could see some of those practices actually put into practice. I was a poll observer this election, and it was very well run in terms, just what you said, in terms of distancing and masking and disinfectants and how we were going to do things. And so yes, Mr. Kim, thank you so much for sharing that information, because I think it really did help. Here in this country. Troy, I'd like to ask you, you kind of touched on it some during your presentation, but, as a Tennessee native, one of the things that I think you maybe have just more insight on and understanding more about the Tennessee economy, if you were going to maybe speak with Tennessee businesses, what would you identify really for them as maybe some opportunities? I know one of the things, for example, you touched on was the aging population, and obviously healthcare delivery is big in this state. Also, senior care is very big in this state. What other maybe opportunities would you identify for Tennessee businesses to maybe consider?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I think we have to look at it from the perspective of what types of things can we really look forward to, but also how do we look to the future? And, one of the things that is growing, in the United States is the consumption of Korean entertainment, specifically K-pop. It's had its biggest year in the United States ever. You've had BTS, which is a Korean band, have their first #1 hit. You've also seen them have multiple #1 albums in the US now. And so I think one of the things, areas where there's collaboration, specifically, in Nashville, when we think about this, is, the music industry. We're talking about one of the top recording areas in the United States. And everyone thinks about country music. And part of me actually would really love to see a K-pop/country duet happen, because I think that there could be some interesting collaborations there. But that being said, all kinds of music is recorded in Nashville. It's not just country music. And I think, that's sometimes something that's underappreciated by people, that you do have a diversity of music in Nashville, that, artists and recording. And so I think, when we look to the entertainment industry, there's opportunities for collaboration there. And, I talked briefly about the tech side and everything. One of the things that Korean artists sort of were on the forefront of is doing virtual concerts and trying to find other ways to engage with artists. So, the creative community in Nashville and the creative community in South Korea probably could take and work with each other to share experiences and how to, we go through this period, probably, if we're being honest, probably not till the fall when most of us are vaccinated and everything. So, you still have probably good, 8-9 months to where we're going to be sort of in this largely virtual world. And that's, if things go well. So you have that. I mentioned hydrogen. One of the things that, South Korea is doing is Hyundai produces hydrogen trucks for moving cargo and everything. And in terms of cost competitiveness, hydrogen is very good, in this one area. You're not really, because of the way electric power, be able to convert trucks to electricity, because you just require too many batteries and it'd be too heavy. And so, one of the things I wonder in terms of, we talked about attracting investment and everything is, as Hyundai perhaps looks to maybe export these or build these in the United States. I'm not sure what the old Saturn plans, if it's been used for anything else yet or not, but maybe looking to try and attract Hyundai to produce these types of trucks in Tennessee in the future. So you have sort of specific things like this, which marry with what Korean companies in the case of the auto industry are looking to do, that marry with what our government is looking towards in terms of trying to decarbonize the economy, also what South Korea's economy is looking for. So you have things like that. I think demographics is a very important issue. We've talked about how the population is aging rapidly there. South Korea, out of large developed countries, has the world's lowest birth rate. So you're going to see this shifts. And we all know that most healthcare in a person's life is towards the end of life. And so as people live longer, and this is the thing I think also that people don't realize about South Korea. South Koreans are amongst the people in the world with the longest lifespans. So you're talking about people who are very healthy, but also are going to have care in older age for much longer than a lot of other countries. And so I think that when we do talk about the medical devices industry, there's probably real opportunities there. And Minister Kim talked about 5G cooperation and everything. And we've talked a lot, sort of in the policy realm in the last couple of years about what types of 5G equipment should be used and where it should be deployed and these kinds of things. And those are all important, especially for security reasons and other things. But I think in terms of the business side, the real question is sort of, what type of content or what type of services are going to be on these systems? How are we going to best take advantage? We're very early on in the stage of this, but this is where, I think, there's tech opportunities in Tennessee to try and work with Korean companies to find new content and new opportunities. So, for example, when they rolled out 5G cell service in South Korea, there was a lot of questions about well, is this really much better? And, there's a Wall Street Journal reporter I know who actually was talking about how, there's some advantages to it. You can download a movie faster and things like that, but we still are at the early stage of how do we find the right applications to use now that we have all of this new capacity. And so I think, given the infrastructure in Tennessee, trying to find collaborative ways to deploy new things, because Korea per capita has more 5G deployment than anywhere in the world right now. So if you're looking for a test bed for 5G applications, South Korea is the place. And so I think those are some of the areas that I would initially maybe focus on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Minister Kim, we got another question from one of our participants. And this kind of follows on with your discussion on Korea pledging to reach net zero emissions, and also, I guess, also with the Biden administration also trying to reach that goal. And as you previously stated, the beef and auto industry are two key trade areas, yet these are also high emission industries. How will South Korea approach potential future regulations of such high emission industries like beef and auto, and how can our two countries compromise between free trade and climate action?
Well, I think the free trade and environmental protection is not, two competing objectives. It's not irreconcilable. It's if we set up a private level of environmental protection for manufacturers and farmers and ranchers, and then that will help domestically. And the problem is, if we have different standards among countries, country A have high standard of environmental regulation, country B has low standard of environmental regulation. That's the problem, because that will make the difference in the competition. So the trade negotiation will have to aim to harmonize those environmental standards among countries, so we can compete in equal footing. So I think that it's the same for the agricultural industry. There is already a discussion in WTO to reduce agricultural subsidies, including subsidies to beef industry. Maybe if we can save some money from there, we can revert those funds to encourage, for example, R&Ds to develop alternative sources of protein from plants and vegetables. So I think it's a thing that we should use our money, taxpayers' money, wisely to defend, to protect the environment, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Marc, let me start with you on this question, and this may be a Minister Kim question too, and really, Troy, you may want to chime in too. So with the new administration in office, this came from one of our participants. How and in what ways can both the U.S. and South Korea work together going forward on trade under the, I'll say, revised Buy American policy that was just recently announced through, executive order just recently?
Okay, well, thank you. That's a great question. So this new, our new administration, the Biden administration's approach to trade is very clear. It's going to be focused on American working families, on defending our values and seeking to protect the long-term prosperity and security of the United States and our people. And so, as President Biden has said, the U.S. is going to be focused on making investments in American workers and American competitiveness before we sign any new trade agreements. And so that's going to be an important and high bar to cross. It's focused on American workers, American families, and ensuring that American competitiveness and prosperity are always protected. That said, the Biden administration has also made clear the U.S. is going to work with allies and partners like South Korea to identify ways to deal with specific trade issues, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's digital economy, whether it's energy. But at the end of the day, any new trade agreements have to protect workers, have to promote transparency, and have to protect the environment. Thank you.
John, you were muted.
Minister Kim or Troy, would either of you like to comment on that question?
I can say a brief word if Minister Kim doesn't want to say anything.
Sure.
So,
What was the question?
The question was, with the new administration in office, and they just recently revised the kind of Buy American policy, how and what ways can both South Korea and the U.S. work together on issues of trade, free trade, within that framework, that Buy American policy framework?
Yes, I'm sorry. I
And
was
Mark just answered.
no, no, no.
No,
That's
that's fine.
my understanding. I thought there was a new question was asked by you when your mic was muted. So that's the
No.
the same question. Yes.
Yeah, I was
Well,
just asking if you had a comment.
Right. The same question. Yes. The Buy American Act. So we are carefully watching. This was announced just a days ago, and then even the previous administration had announced similar policy at the early stage of their of the taking office. Now again, this administration has announced this policy again after a few days of inauguration. But that all governments want to procure their domestic products first of all, but there is an international rule agreements not only in WTO but also in FTAs. There is a rule that guarantee a fair competition among the domestic sources and imported sources. I believe the U.S. government will at least abide by those international rules already agreed. If they want to change the agreed rule, there will be a new negotiation about government procurement. But I guess there is still some room in those agreed agreement where the government, each government can exercise their discretion to favor their domestic products. I think the Biden administration's intention is to use that small discretion wisely to help American manufacturers in their procurement to the United States government. So again, we are carefully watching this with all other trading partners, and then we look forward to how this new policy will reveal in the next few months.
I don't have anything additional to add on this. I think they've both
Okay,
covered it well.
great. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that. I know that's kind of a tricky question that we all have to deal with, different countries have to deal with, because as you say, Minister Kim, each country would like to have a very strong domestic economy. And I know these are difficult issues to work through, but I'm glad to see that there looks like there is plenty of flexibility for us to to work together. So unfortunately, we are out of time. But I want to thank all three of you, for sharing your perspectives today, your thoughts, and answering the questions of our participants. And again, I'd like to extend Ralph Schultz's invitation. We'd love to have you for an in-person visit where we can actually enjoy a lot of what Nashville has to offer. I mean, I moved here now 31 years ago to be here just for a year or two, and then moved back to the Boston area. So I've been here ever since, because I think it is a great place to live. But if you're interested in diving deeper, as Minister Kim mentioned, there will be another discussion tonight sponsored by the Tennessee World Affairs Council. They'll be focusing more on geopolitical and national security issues. And so if you're interested in those issues, then I really strongly urge you to join their town hall tonight. And you can check that out on the Tennessee World Affairs website. So again, I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Ralph. I want to thank the Tennessee World Affairs Council and the International Business Council of the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. And I want to say thank you very much, and we are adjourned. Thank you.